Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar about changing the narrative about Black and Latino boys. The importance of this, from our perspective, the importance of this topic cannot be overstated. I'd like to start by giving a brief statement about Future Kings. Then I'll introduce the panelists who will then continue on with their presentations. The Future Kings are a 501c3 IRS-approved organization. We are changing the narrative. We want to change the narrative about Black and Latino boys by creating pipelines of talent into emerging technologies. We teach these young men in middle school and high school college-level topics such as in the areas of cybersecurity, biomedical game design, biomedical sciences, computer game design, and drone engineering. We are a multi-year, multi-level program that allows these students to gain a competitive advantage over their peers when they graduate from high school. On today's Change the Narrative webinar, our panelists are Mr. Robert Simmons III from Micron. He is in charge of their head and social impact, as well as their STEM programs for Micron Technologies. We have Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Tanya D. McDade, who is the Superintendent of Schools for Prince William County Public Schools. And then finally, we have Dr. Susan Swayze, who is the founder and CEO of the Diversity Think Tank. And with that, what I'd like to do is start with the first introduction and a presentation by Mr. Robert Simmons, who is the, as mentioned, head of social impact for Micron.
Yeah, I think, for me, my opening kind of comments, I certainly am interested to hear my colleagues kind of share their perspective, in particular from the school lens, because this is an ongoing conversation from the days when I worked in schools as a teacher, was the chief of innovation and research for Kaya Henderson in DC Public Schools around boys and young men of color. And I think there are three pieces that are important for all of these conversations, both this one and others around, in particular, Black and Latino boys, is that one is about the narrative. Like, we have to change the narrative. As Trabian Shorters talks about asset framing, it's not simply about the problems and the challenges, but it's also about the beauty, the brilliance, and the opportunities that exist in their lives, right? There are amazing Black and brown boys, and I need to shout out Indigenous boys and Southeast Asian boys as well, that are doing amazing work in schools and society, right? So that's an important thing to acknowledge. But it's also important to acknowledge, as the second part of the process, is using data to understand where the struggles exist so that we understand what to solve for in the system, whether we're solving for individual behavior, systemic behavior, or racist policies, right? And beginning to build towards anti-racist policies that are much more germane to their development in a racialized society. The third piece of this is that when I think about the world of Micron and the work around STEM education, it's important to remember that statistically, Black men and Black boys have the lowest graduation rates of anyone when it comes to STEM education, whether it's undergraduate or PhD programs. And it's critical to acknowledge that two things can be true when you say that. It doesn't mean that we don't support girls and gender expansive youth. It means that we can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time in the racial justice space, and we can do two things. We can advocate for girls and gender expansive youth at the intersection of race, but also do work to advocate for Black and brown boys who we know don't graduate from college, high school, et cetera, at the same rate, right? So I think it's important to name that you can do both, right? And have some nuanced conversations. The fourth thing that's critical to understand is that when we think about the work that we do in philanthropy, it's critical to name those organizations that don't accidentally do this work for Black and Latino boys. What I mean is that there are some organizations that accidentally do this because they focus on equity, right? As opposed to organizations like the Hidden Genius Project out in Oakland, where they specifically focus on Black and brown boys in STEM. That's what they do. Right. So there's a need to make sure that we're going a layer below when we think about our responsibility in philanthropy and not letting people off the hook. Because again, look, like historically, when My Brother's Keeper was around, oh, it was in vogue for every organization to say they were doing something for boys and young men of color. But the reality of it is that's not enough. Like, we have to make sure that on the philanthropic side, we're stepping into this and having very clear conversations that it's not just about girls and gender expansive youth, but it's also about naming the nuanced conversations that are required when we think about the ways in which race and gender intersect in this work. And I find that over the course of my career in STEM, that's always a difficult conversation to have, because people will say, well, yeah, but what about girls? And it's like, I hear you, and I don't disagree with that, but we can do two things at once. And I think that, and Dr. McDade can attest to this, Kaya Henderson, who was the chancellor in DCPS, used to always say to me, when people would critique the focus on boys of color through the work that we were doing, she would always say to people, yeah, but we can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. Like, you know, like, we don't just focus on literacy because literacy scores are X, Y, or Z. We focus on literacy, math, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because in education in particular, you can do more than one thing and be good at all of them if you figure out how to commit the resources and human capital to those things. And I think that the work that Eric and his organization does highlights that nuanced effort to support Black and Latino boys that is really important in communities. And there others nationally that do that, but specific to this community, I want to shout out the work that his organization is doing, and look forward to partnering with him and obviously partnering with Dr. McDade and the school district through my hat at Micron. So I'll pause there and would love to learn from my colleagues.
Okay. Dr. McDade, we'd love to hear from you now.
Thank you. And that was an awesome intro. A lot of the same things that, you know, I probably will touch on and agree with. But one thing I do want to call out at the end of Robert's presentation is just acknowledging organizations that are doing this work intentionally and unapologetically. So I want to thank Dr. Eric King and Future Kings for not only putting this event together, but for the noble work that you do to ensure that our Future Kings really are thriving. And also, I'm grateful to be on the panel with Dr. Simmons and Dr. Swayze. It's an honor to hear your insightful thoughts, your rich perspectives on how we as a galvanized community can change the narrative about Black and Latino boys. So I just think that even today's panel is a crucial event for changing the narrative. Couple of things I'll just touch on, three, not to be repetitive or redundant to what you've already heard, but one, ways in which that we need to do this work to change the narrative. I think that we have to have a platform like what we're doing today, but we need more of this. We have to have a platform for community leaders and social justice advocates to strengthen alliances and partnerships through shared stories, which is why our partnership with Future Kings as a school division is so critically important. I think that leadership roles that reflect our community, where our young people can see leadership and see what they can be, is critically important. And especially for me, in my role and my perspective in the school system, it's just not enough representation. And so the more that we can come together and leverage partnerships like the one that we have is important, so that our young people, especially our males of color, can see people in leadership roles who reflect their community. Right now in Prince William County Public Schools, Black and Hispanic students comprise 55% of Prince William County. And when we break that down, when we break down the generational advantages that have led to social economic opportunities and inherited educational privilege, there just aren't enough people of color to populate the social conscious as academic role models. And this is unfortunate at the school level, because our schools and our classrooms have to serve as both windows and mirrors for our students. And I say windows and mirrors because students have to be able to see themselves like a mirror, as well as the world around them in school. And students are best served when they can envision success and see others with whom they connect as role models and inspiration. And as I stated earlier, we have to do a lot more in the educational space in order for that to happen, because right now, which is a fact, in the classroom, the teaching workforce is still predominantly about to the tune of 77 to 80% white female. And so it's not very often that our boys see men of color, not only in the classroom, but in positions of leadership. And so initiatives and organizations like Future Kings that provide Black and Latino boys with an encouraging space to learn and grow, as well as the promotion of intellectual pride, is necessary. I think we also need to make sure that we're learning from our own lessons by being championing ourselves as intellectual role models, because we have a collective responsibility for the work and to contribute to a counter narrative, if you will, and fight and resist against the damaging narratives that exist currently as it relates to our Black and Latino males. When I came to Prince William County, one of the first things that I did was held several listening sessions with multiple tiers of stakeholders, including the voice of our students. And I think that our students' voices have to be elevated. So one of the ways as we approach this conversation, I'm always going to come from the lens of education. One of the ways that's most important in changing the narrative is making sure that our students' voices are present in the work that we do. And so one of the things that we've done is, from those listening tours, capturing what I heard to create a shared value statement or key commitments, if you will, along with a vision for what we believe in the school division that serves as our North Star. So the first thing we did was crafted a vision statement that is inclusive to make sure that our collective vision is for every student. Regardless of their race, regardless of their country of origin, regardless of their gender, that every student in Prince William County will graduate with the knowledge, skills, and habits of mind necessary to create a thriving future for themselves and their community. So one, clearly articulating what we value and share, and then using what I learned from the narratives that I've heard across the school division to help create a counter narrative for what we envision education to be for all students, and codifying that within our strategic plan, which I'll talk a little bit about more later. The second thing is how we take the stories that we've heard and reflect on those and connect them to lived experiences. One of the things that I want to share from the educational front is there's some data that came out in a study from the TNTP project in 2018. It was called The Opportunity Myth. And what it showed was that regardless of ability, Black and Brown students collectively, both male and female alike, collectively are presented with lower expectation across the board in classrooms, meaning that regardless of their ability, they were 3 times more likely to access work that and content that was below grade level in comparison to their non-minority peers. And so when we think about that narrative, we run the risk of constructing our ideology based on others' experiences and beliefs about us instead of our own. So one of the things that is important to change the narrative is raising the bar of expectation and what we expect from our Black and Brown boys, Black and Hispanic boys within our school system, making sure that they're met with high expectations, making sure that they are seen as intellectuals and that we are sharing their stories and their lived experiences as a counter narrative. The third thing that I would say is critically important in keeping with that is how we engage our students. I heard you talk about, Robert, dropout rates. And right now, when we disaggregate our data, especially true for our Hispanic students, there's about a 10% gap when you look at our overall division graduation rates and you look at the graduation rates for our Black and brown boys. You see disparate rates in comparison. But what people fail to realize is that graduation, or the lack thereof, or dropout, doesn't happen because of intellect. Our boys are disengaged long before graduation day. And so we have to ask ourselves, are our schools and our classroom hospitable places for our Black and Latino males to be able to thrive, to be able to see themselves, and to be seen as intellectuals? And when they're not hospitable places, then the chances and likelihood of them dropping out and not coming back to a place where they don't feel welcome or don't feel it's safe for them. And safety is not just physical safety, it's psychological safety, it's emotional safety. And so when that's not happening, then it's highly likely that they wouldn't want to stay in that environment, and that leads to drop out. And so it's important for us in education, for me, as we think about how we change the narrative and how we make sure that our Black and Latino males are seen as intellectual beings, is that we have to, in PWCS, operationalize critical pedagogy. And we're trying to do that now with the implementation of Universal Design for Learning, which really establishes a framework that's intended to proactively meet the needs of all learners. It assumes that barriers to learning are in the design of the environment, not the student. And this is a challenge to dominate narratives in education that ignored the lived experience and knowledge making practices of students. Putting students at the center and understanding that they're not coming into the classroom as a blank slate. It's not tabula rasa. They have lived experiences that they are bringing to the table, and making sure that we're providing our learners with multiple means of representation, means of action and expression, and means of engagement. So we want our Black and Latino males, and like you said, Robert, it's good for all. We can walk and chew gum. We can put in practices that work for all students, but not ignoring that by and large, Black and Latino males are often left out of the equation. And so we want our students to not only be consumers of knowledge, but producers of knowledge as well. And then third and finally, as we approach this conversation, I think what we need to stay grounded in is that our presence embodies a representation of intellectual success, cultural resiliency, and discursive visibility. And so I think the best way to put that in a nutshell when we think about our students is I'm reminded of Sojourner Truth's frustrated phrase of, "Ain't I a woman?" And it pains me to think how many of our Black and Latino males are wondering, ain't I a student? Shouldn't this be a place for me as well? Don't I deserve, in the words of Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., don't I deserve role models in the classroom who not only embody my communal identity, but understand my socio-linguistic discourse of engagement and participation? So that when we center the work that we do in our classrooms, from engagement to curriculum, to make sure that our Black and Latino boys are engaged in a way that is productive for them, where they are met with high expectations and their voice and their lived experiences are valued in our classrooms and in our curriculum, that's when we'll be able to see intellectual giants come to the forefront, and that narrative will be changed. We have to make sure in our curriculum that they're seeing more than just Martin Luther King Jr., right? Where's Daniel Payne? Where's Cesar Chavez? Where is Paulo Freire? Where is Thurgood Marshall? They have to see in the curriculum the rich history that exists that represents and embodies the intellect, that the intellectual beings that they are. So those are some of the things that I think have to be brought to this conversation. You know, how we measure the success of our Black and Latino males. Another thing that Robert talked about was data, how we're using data, because right now there's two edges of data. what I see today is data about Black and Latino males is being weaponized. And so we have to use the data that we have that shows the counter narrative and the positive accomplishments and resiliency of our young men. And we have to use that to our advantage rather than to our demise. So those are some of the ways I think, using data to share a counter narrative, using the stories that we have and the voices of our young people, and then capitalizing on and taking full advantage of programs like Future Kings and organizations that look to elevate Black and Latino males in a positive light. And then how we have a network collectively as leaders of color, and how we use our social capital to tell a counter narrative as well and create safe spaces for our Black and Latino males. We have a responsibility also, and we have to build a stronger network for that. And everyone has to see themselves as responsible for that counter narrative.
Thank you, Dr. McDade. I'll take it from here. All right, Dr. King, do you want to speak?
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you very much. That was excellent and a great conversation starter. But now, Dr. Swayze, if you'd like to go, and then we'll delve into some more conversation.
Thank you. So first and foremost, I want to mention that I used to be on the board of Future Kings. I think I did a term, and I'm currently conducting interviews with some of the boys currently enrolled in Future Kings to document the successes. So that work is ongoing. Thank you for bringing up the concept of data and research. I am a researcher. I teach statistics and qualitative research methods. So when Dr. McDade mentioned how data is vilifying Black and Latino boys, I often say in class that when it comes to, I say people of color because they tend to group us into a group of people of color, and we're not monolithic by any means. But when it comes to people of color in data, they use quantitative data to demonize, and we need qualitative data to humanize. So that is why with the Future Kings project right now, we are using interviews with the boys to talk about their successes and what they see and what happens, what magic happens at Future Kings that can be transferred, scaled, and so we can ensure success of more boys. So as you spoke, you mentioned the use of data and how the statistics the odds don't look like they're in our favor. I have a 15-year-old boy, and I tell him quite quickly, I said, you have greater odds of this happening than this good stuff happening. And how do we make sure we can get you over on the good foot? And he looks at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, the bad things that are happening don't happen. You don't always see them coming at you, and you cannot always be on the offense. Sometimes you just need to be, on the defense, and you always need to be ready. And I hate to say that to my child, but as one of my colleagues in California says so often, Black boys go from cute to criminal real quick. And they need to be ready for what that means. Their voices drop a little bit, they get real tall over the summer, and all of a sudden they're intimidating, and they're the same babies that they were last year. But all of a sudden they have to be controlled, not taught. And they feel it and they know. So to your point, ain't I a woman? Ain't I a student? Don't I deserve to be called on, to be respected, to be heard? This is my place too. So as we talk about the barriers to STEM for Black and Latino boys, I think there are societal barriers, which boys are cast into certain buckets early on, and boys that with complexion tend to be cast in buckets that earn less. We're here in the Northern Virginia area, and there's other belts of affluence throughout the country, and jobs are aplenty, but they're not going to our boys, right? And why is that? Why is that? People coming out of undergraduate with $100,000 and more offers, it doesn't tend to be, Black and Latino boys. Well, because at that point, kind of too late. The whole STEM boat leaves somewhere in middle school when you're being tracked into the different classes, when you're being tracked into honors this or heading for AP that. So you have to demonstrate in courses with rote knowledge, rote memory, the reading, the science classes, or just rote memory to get to the higher level classes that are more interactive and applied. And that's where boys excel, is where you get to build and break and conceptualize. But you have to go through all this rote memory stuff and get selected, not inspired, but selected for these higher level courses, which then puts you on a track for certain degrees. I just dropped a kid off at college last month, and I sat with a mom at a table, and she was telling me how her son got into UEA and all the different things he did to get in, the special summer programs he did, the this, and this. And she said to me, "What does your daughter do?" I had to laugh. I just said, "Oh, she's just plain brilliant." My daughter does have a resume, but that wasn't the point. The point is, she lives in a household of people who said to her, "You will go to college, you will get a graduate degree. And then after that, you can do all sorts of other things." But from a very early age, that is what we said to her. Just like my mother said to me. My parents didn't get to go to college, didn't have that opportunity. And I was I was tiny. "What do you want to be when you grow up, Susan?" "Firefighter." "Then you have to get a PhD in fire science." I do. Everything I wanted to be required the highest degree, no matter what it was. And I thought, wow. So when I got to high school, people said to me, "Well, what do you want to be? What are you going to be?" And I said, "A college student." It's required. That is required of me. And I don't get to be anything else until I'm done. So I did what I was supposed to do. You see these pieces of paper framed behind me? Straight through, earned my PhD by the age of 26. I did exactly as I was told, because that was the only option. The only option I had was which major, not could I stop. There weren't any off-roads for me. So when the school said to me, "We will not give you scholarship applications. We don't think you should go to college." My mother was right there saying, "Oh, she is going. Give her those papers. We will fill them out. You will not weed her out." But what if you don't have that, Mom? Right? And it's still happening to these days. The gatekeepers, the difficulties understanding the systems, the tracking. And I'm not trying to blame the schools, because there has to be organization. But it's the idea of selectivity, that you have to be selected for STEM, not that STEM is for everyone, right? So if you change the narrative saying that STEM is for everyone, if you change the narrative that says in order to be successful, in order for our communities to be economically successful, in order for us to grow, we need to have every person within our society to be able to get the higher paying jobs. We change those expectations and set the expectations, then we'll have a different narrative. Takes time, takes pushing, takes talking. But when we say our way to fill our employment gaps are right here, and we need to grow those people, we have to grow all of the people, not just the ones that are selected. So the journey to STEM, when you look at it on paper, is a very narrow one. It's a very elite one. It's not for every man or woman. And so until we change those ideas that STEM is for everyone, and we change the ideas to say that our Black and Latino boys can fill these roles, given the right scenarios, and to show the success stories, right? We mentioned Future Kings. I'm going to look up Hidden Genius when I hop off. There are programs throughout the country that need to be amplified. And websites that show the mosaic of programs that can make this happen. And how can we take all that what we've learned from those programs and bake that into just everyday education? What can we do? Because we have success stories about Black and Latino boys. So that's all I wanted to say to start this off. It wasn't as linear as it could have been, but I wanted to build on what Dr. Simmons and Dr. McDade contributed.
But thank you very much for that. For some of the attendees, if you would like to put a question in, we have you should have the capability to put a question in the Q&A area. If you'd like to put something in chat, that is also available to you. But I wanted you to know that you do have an opportunity to participate in today's discussion. For all three of the panelists, and maybe we can combine it into answers. But I just wanted to throw something out that it seemed like all of you touched on one way or another, and maybe drill down a little bit further into it. There are, and what I'd like to understand is business, schools, and communities, and how can we coordinate the actions of each of those so that they're working together to identify and nurture some of the hidden geniuses that we're trying to change the narrative about. I didn't know about the program Hidden Geniuses before, Robert, but for sure, we've been, in Future Kings, we've been talking about hidden geniuses for a long while. And in our definition, what we're looking at is those students who are motivated, intelligent, doing the right thing, but typically overlooked. And so that by seeking them out and creating the environments like Dr. McDade was talking about, creating environments for them to grow their skills. And those are ones that we're calling hidden geniuses, helping them move from good to great by doing things which are intentional. So we are one nonprofit, but I think that a broader coalition of business, schools, and communities working together could find more of these geniuses and nurture them in a more dramatic way. And I wanted to get the three of you's opinion on that particular thought. Whoever would like to start first would be much appreciated.
Well, I'll jump in only because shamelessly, I need to plug that we want more partnerships. So you gave me a good commercial opportunity. When I launched our strategic plan, again, that strategic plan was built based on the voices of over 4,000 stakeholders who shared their hopes and dreams and aspirations for education in Prince William County and what they want for their children. And so when I launched that, I put out a charge to our business community and our community organization and leaders that the school system can't do it alone. We can't. We need everyone working together and willing to step in a spirit of service to our young people, especially in the business community where there's opportunities for our students to see that there are people willing to invest in their future. And so that's critically important. And it's so apropos that Micron's on here because, organizations like Micron who have partnered with the school division, who have been willing to invest in the future of our students, we need more of that. And if I can, in some way have that reverberated throughout the county. So I think a lot of times business partners want to, but don't know how to tap in. Community partnerships, I've heard people say, hey, we've got things we can do. We can support, apprenticeships and internships and we can support, work-based learning experiences and training on soft skills, but we don't even know who to talk to. We don't even know how to get connected, right? So I think, it is incumbent upon us as a school division, one, to be clear about what we need by way of support, but then two, removing some of the barriers and the red tape that goes along with trying to get connected and opening the doors to welcome. The thing with Future Kings is that, you, as I said earlier, you have been intentional and unapologetic about pushing the needle on the work and saying you were one of the first people that said, hey, we want to meet. We want to know, how we can do more. And not everyone is going to push and be aggressive about, their agenda. And so for me, it's about how do we get our message out that we want the partnerships, that we want businesses to help, and what do we need help with? And STEM is one of the biggest areas that we need support. The STEM field's growing 3 times the rate of other careers when you look at the market, right? And what I hear from companies, and I think, Robert will attest to this, is that they want a stronger pipeline, right? And Prince William County Public Schools should be that pipeline. And so I think some of it is just, we have to, share a little bit more openly, communicate more aggressively on what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, and what we need from business leaders and organizations, because sometimes they don't know how to check in, or they don't know what to offer to help support the school system.
Okay. Robert?
Yeah, I think the partnership piece is important, right? And I think it cuts both ways, right? I think there's challenges that all systems have with partnerships, right? Like, are there a lot of hoops? Are there a lot of barriers? And having managed a lot of that in DCPS, have firsthand experience like with the frustration of that. And what happens is that on the other end, people on the other end of the equation get frustrated and tap out, right? And just like, I don't have time for that, right? So there's that part. But there's also a requirement on those who are in the business community and other parts of the social sector is to operate with a level of patience, because school systems are complicated, right? Like, this isn't like putting widgets in a hole and all of a sudden you produce a chip like we do at Micron. It doesn't work that way, right? There's just a lot happening in a school system that requires a level of comfort with ambiguity that sometimes in business, if you change out a part on a machine, you then get a new product. It doesn't work that way in schools, right? So I think there's a level of patience that has to happen on the business side. The other piece is that it's critical for businesses to have an understanding of the social sector as opposed to the social sector having an understanding of business, right? And what I mean is that there's like this hierarchy of knowledge when we think about our society, where it's corporate and business and then the social sector, when in fact, these two sectors need to run in parallel, not in a hierarchy, right? And so when we do those things, we can accomplish quite a bit. And I'm proud to say that, through the work that I've led as the head of social impact and STEM programs for all of North America, less than 1% of people who are heads of social impact for Fortune 500 companies are Black, right? So I'm unapologetic in saying that my goal is also to bring other people who look like me into the space, but also those who have experience in the social sector, to make sure that those who are in corporate philanthropy and in corporate America have a direct line to understand. And I always say this to folks in philanthropy: just because you're on the board of a school, on the board of a nonprofit, doesn't mean you understand the social sector. It just means you're on the board, right? And it's like the people who, and Dr. McDade, you'll appreciate this. I always say to folks, like, look, just because you love kids doesn't mean you should teach them, right? Like, maybe you should go work at the Boys and Girls Club. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means that we all have a ministry in this world. Your ministry may not be teaching math to 7th graders in whatever school in Prince William County on Tuesday. Your ministry might be running this after school program. So part of it is helping to get folks in the right place to make the most impact. And then the last thing is, from the perspective of employers, right? It's critical to understand, and David Stovall, who's a homie at University of Illinois, Chicago, used to always say, like, a doctoral degree just means you paid a lot of money to write a really long paper. It doesn't always mean you know anything more than when you started, right? So there's this hierarchy of intellect that we place on roles that exist in tech and STEM because of how we over-intellectualize tech. And there are folks who come out of Prince William County, DC Public Schools, Prince George's County, Fairfax, et cetera, right? that I can name that have a high school diploma can get a job working at one of the fabrication facilities at Micron and make more than a living wage and have all of the perks and benefits of existing in this space called tech. But how do we tell that story as opposed to, hey, we need everybody to become an engineer? And part of it is that we have a problem with the narrative in education, right? Going back to my roots in education, right? Is that we tell this massive story of everyone needs to graduate from college, and what percentage of your kids, Dr. McDade, are actually going to college? It's not about college singularly, it's about post-secondary enrollment and options. Post-secondary is inclusive of trade school. And again, being from Detroit and growing up where I did in a very challenging neighborhood in Detroit, there are plenty of my homies that graduated from high school that own they're electricians, trucking companies, and they make a whole lot more money than I do, and have made a whole lot more money over time. They can feed their family, they're contributing members to their community. So it's essential for us to do this. And the last thing I'll say is that I'm a hip hop head. And so I got to quote Biggie, right? We have to stop over intellectualizing what does it mean to be a Black boy in America. You don't need to be a professor at any university to understand this. Biggie said to us, and Biggie has a PhD from the block. Biggie said stereotypes of a Black male misunderstood and is still all good. Biggie did one of the most astute analysis of Black boyhood in America, that Black boys live in this stereotype space and are misunderstood because of those stereotypes that are placed on them, not simply because of people who don't look like them, but because of people who also look like them do some of this same thing. So it's critical for us to come together and figure this out. And Dr. McDade, Micron is there. You got all my information. Just tell us what you need, because we're ready to roll. Welcome to the East Coast. Your time in Chicago, I followed it. And so just honored to have you in this community. Being from Detroit, I got a lot of respect for Chicago, although, the whole Jordan
I know.
little suspect, like we made Jordan who he was. So I just have to make sure it's clear that the Detroit Pistons made him Michael Jordan. We strengthened him, got him
bad
tough.
boys just for
That's
bad
right.
boys.
That was back when we played real basketball. That's a whole other conversation we could talk about. So I just want to welcome you to this community. Commit that Micron is here to support you, but also to Dr. King, commit my support to the work to expand your work and build collaborations between your work, Hidden Genius Project, and others, because I think there's a need to build an ecosystem around those kings and queens in Prince William County.
Thank you. I appreciate the partnership and I appreciate your support.
I just wanted to clarify, Robert, that I don't think you were saying that people shouldn't get post-secondary degrees. You're just saying that's not the only option within STEM. Good. I just want to clarify, as someone who highly believes in degrees, just want to make sure. But you have many yourself. But I also wanted to mention that we talked about post-secondary certifications and licenses and experiential learning as well. But there's also certificates that can be accomplished while you're still in high school through the dual enrollment programs, et cetera. And the more that those can grow in the STEM arena, the stronger that pipeline will be. So, graduating college, already having a certificate or two under your belt, graduating high school with a certificate or two, and dual enrollment credits is a huge plus. And I know that I just talked to a kid the other day who got a certificate in drone engineering, flying unmanned vehicles during his senior year. And I said to him, it's not a big deal. And he said, no, I plan on getting lots of certificates. That's just my first. And I just love that type of moxie in that umph. And to bring those stories to life is very, very important. But to build up some of those junior and senior year dual enrollment certificate possibilities is great as well.
Okay, great. What I'd like to do is go back and refocus even more on the changing the narrative, because we're talking a lot about components that we can employ to help change the narrative. I'd like to maybe be a little more specific talk about maybe some specific action items that either as individuals or as organization leaders that we can do to bring that intentionality to the idea that we're going to be changing the narrative. That if we just create a pipeline of more and more Black and Latino boys into lucrative STEM fields, that might get a whole lot of guys into new STEM fields, but it may not be changing the narrative about them. It might just be making more people think that we got more Black and Latino guys in these STEM fields and leave the narrative as it is. And so what I'd like to do is say, how can we do both? How can we both get them in there as well as change the narrative about what it took to get them there and why they deserve to be there?
Can I hop in on this real quick? Because this is important, right? In tech and in STEM, right? We make the mistake of trying to do this without schools. What I mean is that we talk about recruiting more Black and brown boys in to work at Micron and other tech companies, but we never talk about the need to increase the percentage of teachers of color in STEM, right? Like the two go hand in hand, because one of the metrics that we know is that the 100 Black men of America say what they see is what they'll become. So on the one hand, we want to see something else come out on the pipeline, which is more Black and brown boys, but we also need to increase the percentage of not just Black and brown men teaching STEM, but Black and brown teachers teaching STEM at the middle school and high school level, right? And so at the Micron Foundation, we're actually working with Sharif El-Mekki and the Center for Black Educator Development and Edgar Palacios at the Latinx Education Collaborative to do just that, right? And so I think that the conversations have to run in parallel from a philanthropic perspective. How are we funding Dr. McDade's desire to diversify the teaching force, but also upskill elementary school teachers in their ability to teach advanced STEM, not in advanced STEM classes, but in a general education class, right? Because all kids deserve access to advanced STEM thinking and engineering design. It's just a matter of how do we do that in an elementary school, for example, where we know that teacher preparation falls short when it comes to training elementary teachers how to actually teach STEM. Granted, literacy is important. Early literacy leads to great STEM engagement because you have to be able to read. However, the two have to run concurrently. So I just want to name that there are two things that have to be true in order to get to Dr. King's point in terms of outcomes where we have more Black and brown men working in tech. We also have to work to increase the knowledge base, but also the diversity of STEM teachers in pre-K through 12 education. We can apply the same thing to university faculty in science education programs and in engineering departments where it's woefully lacking in Black and Latino folks serving on faculty.
And I think what I'll add on to that is in terms of changing the narrative, I said earlier that, you know, data can be used to weaponize as a weapon and can be weaponized against Black and Latino males, especially when the data shows disparate rates of achievement, graduation, performance, and then in looking at dropout to their non-minority peers. But it also can be used on the other side of the coin to help change the narrative when we create the kinds of educational environments that we see results in the data. And we can leverage that to help share a different story about achievement and what's happening. To the point about, I think it was Susan that talked a little bit about this earlier in terms of students not Black, particularly Black and Latino males not accessing advanced placement and IB and dual enrollment and being successful in that. So one of the things when you talk about actionable items, STEM is not just about, what career they go into. STEM and teaching STEM and making sure we have more Black and Latino males going, not just into the STEM fields, but taking the kind of coursework that prepares them for a STEM field, whether they want to go into STEM or not, is about ensuring that there is more critical thinking, that our students are visionaries, that they're innovators, that they're global collaborators, right? Some of the knowledge and skills that are acquired through STEM education is transferable skills that allows their intellectual genius to show. That allows them to be the entrepreneurs, to allow them to be the innovators and have inventions, that are impactful for the world. And so what we have to do is make sure they're getting into that coursework and they're not being presented with the bare minimum, right? We know that in STEM, students should take 4 years of math. They should take 4 years of science. And if the minimum requirement is 3 years, no, you have to do more than that. And we have to make sure that we are counseling our young men to do just that, right? To take the advanced coursework rather than discouraging them and making them feel like they're not capable or they're not worthy. So actionable for me as an educator and in the division where I can influence how we remove barriers for our Black and Latino males as they not just seek STEM careers, but seek the kind of education that prepares them for STEM experiences. Right now, we're implementing a couple of things. One, every high school we did budget for and the board approved to have a college and career advisor to make sure that every student upon graduation has a concrete post-secondary plan in their back pocket that secures their future. Someone has to be talking to our young men. The second thing that's actionable for us is making sure that there's access to excellence. So more of our Black and Latino males are accessing advanced placement courses in the STEM areas and IB courses and dual enrollment in the STEM subject matter. And we partnered with Equal Opportunity Schools. And so 11 out of 13 of our high schools are now on board to evaluate and remove the barriers that have been prohibitive in nature in our Black and Latino males accessing those kinds of advanced coursework that we know when they do take AP and IB, whether they pass the exam or not, the sheer exposure of being in those classrooms, they're better prepared for college-bearing coursework. So those are a few things that we're doing right now. I think the post-secondary space is big, making sure that the counseling is happening, making sure that they have the post-secondary plans in their back pocket, but more importantly, making sure that the way that we're scheduling and advising is to promote Black and Latino males going into, advanced coursework, particularly in the STEM areas, as opposed to discouraging them. And those numbers, we're seeing that there's lagging indicators for success for them in those spaces. So from we can take a really tactical approach from the educational side. And then I do believe it will bear out in the data where we can use it as a positive counter narrative to some of the negative data that we've been seeing about Black and Latino males in education.
Right, and I just wanted to add to that to talk about the role of media, social media, and how campaigns have been made for women and turning, instead of being pretty, being strong is pretty, like how they transform so much with using the different athletes to talk about strength instead of talking about, I don't want to talk about it. I'm getting to how with the women that we have transformed, how women are viewed in terms of the media, from being stick figures to being strong. We also have that same possibility in terms of Black boys and Latino boys, and showing what Black men and Latino men are out there doing in terms of the trades and the sciences and all those things. We can actually put those images out there and to share those stories. And I think that campaigns have been done successfully with women. And I think that the roadmap is there. It's just putting a spotlight, being intentional about, not to mention the name of Bill Cosby, but what the Cosby Show did for the Black male doctor and the Black female attorney, and people thought, oh, that's commonplace. I see it on TV. So using the media and social media to put out positive images about real life people who are doing real things with science, technology, and have actually used math in an applied way. No one thinks about math. Who majors in math anymore? People do, because they use it to talk about gaming and algorithms and so many things. And so bringing those things alive and showing people that look like them in those positions. So that's another way to change a narrative, to your point, Dr. King.
Thanks. Robert, I'd like to go back to something that you mentioned a while ago about the philanthropic community. And since you're in that community, what are some of the decision factors that you use when you're deciding what to support and what not to? Part one, and then part two on that is your model the kind of model that others in the philanthropic community could follow, or is it unique? You think it's more unique to Micron?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I really look for organizations that are really committed to work at the intersection of STEM and equity, right? And that could be both startup or long-standing organizations. And I think that the ability to produce third-party evaluations as a measure of success for nonprofits is fundamentally flawed because it requires money to do that. So if you're a small nonprofit and you don't have it, it doesn't mean you're not doing good work. It just means that there's a need to engage in different ways to talk about your impact. In the same way that I would say a school and a school system, you know, just because 30% of the kids aren't reading at grade level doesn't mean it's a bad school, right? Because it's complicated. There are nuances that oftentimes sit outside of the control of the nonprofit or the school, right? That requires a village to solve for. So I think there's that. I also, you know, as someone who's a trained social scientist and a recovering academic and you know, trained researcher, like I do my research, right? And part of that research is more than data, but talking to people, right? Organizations that they partner with and things like that. And I think that in philanthropy, we need to do more talking and to people and listening to people and less pontificating from on high. And I think that that's important, right? And it doesn't mean that folks in philanthropy don't have voice or something to add. It's just that much of the direction should be coming from the community. And I think that, you know, that is super important. Do I think that philanthropy is there yet as a discipline in a field? No, I think that some people operate, at least for me, I use social justice philanthropy as a framework, which is about transparency, listening to people, but also tracking not just the data of organizations, but who are we actually funding, right? And there was a big report from Bridgespan and Echoing Green that said that philanthropy disproportionately funds white-led organizations. And, you know, and it's a similar analysis and, you know, no shade to Michelle Rhee, but the philanthropic community loved Michelle Rhee. But when Kaya Henderson became chancellor in DCPS, she did the same thing. She didn't really change the policy. She said things differently. She was a much nicer version of a chancellor, to be real frank. But like the philanthropic community didn't give Kaya Henderson the same amount of money. And I would argue Kaya Henderson was much more successful during her time in DCPS than Michelle Rhee, right? Again, no shade to Michelle Rhee, but it's just an analysis and assessment of how philanthropy rolls with these things from a leadership perspective. So I think for me, I try to look at those things. And the last thing I look for is people who are open to growth and change when you're partnering with them, because many nonprofits aren't open to change, but you know, many folks in philanthropy aren't open to change. So I think that this ability to be deal with nuance and ambiguity is really important because what happens on Monday in a nonprofit, you may have a plan, but as Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, right? And it's like running schools. Like, yeah, you got a plan, but like, you know, if a third of your students show up and there's something that happened in the community on the block, guess what? That literacy lesson you had at 8:45 is irrelevant, right? So I think for me, the nonprofits that are super flexible, remain committed to their mission, I think is my space. And I'd love to have a larger conversation about that because I think it's kind of ambiguous for both school leaders and nonprofits led by people of color. Like, what does it take to receive grant and funding from nonprofits. And I think from my experience working in schools, having raised millions of dollars and working in nonprofits, in particular at CBMA with Sean Dove, you know, like we had to raise money, and I learned a lot of lessons along the way, some good, some bad, and had some, you know, things that I would celebrate and some things that really, you know, were disheartening and sad. So, you know, happy to continue the conversation with folks as need be.
We have some questions in the Q&A. I'm going to take some of them, and we will maybe text some of the other ones. The first one is for you, Dr. McDade. Says that the community loves you, and what can parents do to support changing the narrative? Where that includes speaking at school board meetings, for example. Can you share how feedback during citizens' comment time is received and digested?
Yeah, the way that it's received and digested for me is, you know, I listen intently during citizens' comment time and take copious notes about what I'm hearing, and then use that to inform decision-making. Or to make course corrections in practices within the school division to address some of the concerns, particularly as it relates to this topic for today, as it relates to Black and Brown, you know, males, particularly, which I've had some students actually speak at the board meeting, but then I've also had students reach out to me to schedule meetings with me. And I had several students from the Black Student Union come and meet with me and share what the narrative looks like in their respective schools. And so I use that, and you know, Susan talked about the importance of qualitative data, which sometimes is more important than quantitative data, because qualitative data gives us visibility into a situation that you can't capture sometimes just from the sheer numbers. And so I use that to inform programming. I use that to inform training, you know, for mindset shifts that need to happen in the organization. So it's really valuable when we do hear, particularly from our students especially, but when we hear from our community at large about what's happening, the narratives of what's happening on the ground in our schools, because that does inform the decisions that we make. And I think, you know, the ways that parents can, parents being engaged, number one, is something that I'm big on and have been trying to promote, but also making sure that schools are places that are warm and inviting and welcoming for all parents as well. Parents being engaged, having their voice be a part of the school advisory council, participating in the family engagement series that we operate, which are workshops and training sessions for parents, you know, being informed with the communication that comes out, you know, knowing what's happening in the school division with information that we share. Those are all ways that our parents can, you know, really be helpful in, one, voicing and sharing their views of what's happening in the school division is always welcome, but then also being active participants and engaged partners in education is also critically important.
Well, I'd like to just thank everybody. I know that we have come to the end of the hour that we had budgeted. This has been a very enlightening conversation. I would like for us to be able to continue it. I think this changing the narrative is something that we all have a heart for, and would like to see it implemented in a way that benefits the young men of color in our community. And so I think that this is one of the continuing steps toward being able to change that narrative about our boys. And I think that these types of online discussions can really help further and maybe even draw in more people who can have a positive role in making these steps possible. So we'd like for this to be a continuing series. For those of you that we were not able to answer your questions during the session today, we will, if you put a question in the Q&A area, we will send you a written response. I'll contact the panelists and let them know what it is, and then we'll provide you with a written response. So if there's something that we'd like to say as a final word, then I'll let each of you say something quickly at the end of this. so that we don't go too far over the promise period. Okay, so I'll start. Let's do it in the same order that we started. Robert, you first, and then Dr. McDade, and then we'll end with you, Dr. Swayze.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. I want to share a book that someone wrote, Black, oh, wait, there we go, Black, Brown, Bruised, and it's all about the racialized STEM education, big on resources. My mother's a librarian, so like I got plenty of books, and would encourage us to really think about racialized STEM education. And just want to share my email address for folks who want to follow up. Robert Simon, no S, SIMMON @micron.com. You can find me on Twitter at Robert_Simmons3. Happy to chat, share more about Micron, more specific to this region. I'm here to see Dr. McDade win. The percentage of Black women who are superintendents is small, yet the large chunk of Black teachers are women, which we can unpack at some other point in time over a drink, perhaps. So I'm here to see Dr. McDade win. I live in this community. And so I'm committed to her success. I'm here to see Dr. King win as well, because we need to see leaders of color successful in the nonprofit sector. So looking forward to partnering with both of you. My excitement for this work is goes back to my first days walking into Drew Middle School as a teacher in 1996. And so Dr. Swayze is always active on social media. So definitely shouting out her work and the work she does. Sorry, didn't mean to bypass that. Was just kind of going through my thoughts as I race to get off because I have to go to a meeting that I'm being summoned to. So yeah, so I'm gonna hop off because I gotta go, but appreciate y'all. Feel free to ping me. Appreciate everybody and looking forward to being in partnership with everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert, for the valuable contributions. Dr. McDade.
Thank you. Well, I'll be quick. I just really want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of the panel, and thank you for your continued partnership and support in the incredible work, that noble work that you're doing. Enjoyed being on the panel with Dr. Swayze and Dr. Simmons and all of the insight that they brought to the conversation. And just want to close out by saying to all of our participants and to you that my full commitment is behind the need for us to change the narrative around Black and Latino males, and for the need for our young men to be successful in understanding that education is primarily the way that they are going to be able to experience success and have rewarding careers and a fulfilling, creative, fulfilling, and thriving future for themselves. So it's not lost on me what my role is in Prince William County Public Schools to protect all of our students, but understanding that there are students who are considered the least served by what the data shows, and that we have to bolster education to support them. So I'm committed to the partnership. Dr. King, looking forward to all that we can do together, and hopefully from this discussion, we'll get even more organizations that are willing to partner with the school division.
Thank you very much. And final word, Dr. Swayze.
Oh, I'll just do what you're too humble to do, Dr. King. I think that people should check out Future Kings. So go to their website, look to see the work that they're doing. There's some amazing things happening right there in Prince William County, and people might want to either sign a child up for it, somehow figure out how to be involved in the organization, donate, maybe attend the gala that happens in the spring. So if Dr. King could put the Future Kings email address and website in the chat, that'd be great.
Okay, and for those who participated, attended, we would like to send you an email with some of those contact points as mentioned, especially the Future Kings website, and maybe some information about the kind of things that we're doing so you could follow up. And so with that, I would say thank everyone for attending today. We will have a future event. We will be inviting everyone to come back for that next event whenever we schedule it. Again, thanks again, and we will see you later. Bye-bye.